Councillor Brenda Brandis, when you do speak, I might get you to speak up a little bit because you're coming across quite muted at the moment. So if you're able to speak up, that would be very much appreciated.
How does it sound?
Better, but you're still a little bit faint.
Still a bit faint? Okay. How about now?
That's better, but yeah, you'll need to speak quite loudly and clearly. I think if people are going to understand what you're saying.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 2023 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that any recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Attendance by electronic means. Councillor Andre Brenda Brandis has requested to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So, in accordance with Regulation 14 capital C and 14 capital C capital A of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I've authorised Councillor Brenda Brandis to attend the meeting by electronic means. Councillor Brenda Brandis, in accordance with Regulation 14 capital C capital A, subsection 5 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, can you maintain confidentiality during the meeting and when the meeting goes behind closed doors?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm confidentiality and also confidentiality when the meeting goes behind closed doors.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. That brings us to item 2, which is disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member. That's me, and there's no such announcements this evening. Item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies. There's no apologies this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, and Councillor Andre Brenda Brandis does have an approved leave of absence for the period of 23 July 2023 to 30 July 2023 inclusive, but he is joining us tonight remotely. Item 5 is declarations of interest, and there's a few here, so bear with me. Councillor Nick Warland has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.2 as an individual and companies named in the information before council are known to me. Councillor Nick Warland has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.3 as revocation of some local planning policies listed in this report relate to completed projects undertaken by clients of a former employer who were clients for the duration of my employment. Councillor Ken Manolis has declared an impartiality and proximity interest in item 10.3.3 as I have a close relative who may be affected by the revocation of one of the policies, and I know residents who may be affected by the revocation of the policies. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me. I've declared an impartiality interest in item 12.1 as I am a former co-patron of the Wesley and South Perth Wasp Hockey Club. Councillor Nick Warland has declared an impartiality interest in item 12.1 as senior representatives of WASP's management are known to me through previous professional relationships. Councillor Stephen Russell has declared an impartiality interest in item 12.1 as a family member has, is and may in the future be a member of the Wasps Hockey Club. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Councillor Mary Choi has declared an impartiality interest in item 12.1 as my husband has been a past member of the Wasps Hockey Club and a volunteer coach and is also a Wesley College Old Boy. My sons have played for Wasps and they also attend Wesley College. Councillor Glenn Cridland has declared an impartiality interest in item 12.1 as in the past my children did play hockey for the Wasps Hockey Club. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me, has declared a financial and proximity interest in item 12.2 as this item may result in financial gain, loss, benefit or detriment to persons who donated to my election campaign in 2019. This item also concerns a proposed change to the use of land that adjoins land owned by those same persons. Councillor Nick Warland has declared a financial and proximity interest in item 12.2 as donors to my campaign at the 2023 Como Ward Extraordinary Election own or enjoy right of use to property impacted by any council decision on this item. Councillor Ken Manolis has declared an impartiality and proximity interest in item 12.2 as I have a close relative who owns a unit on the South Perth Esplanade and I know residents who live on the Esplanade. And CEO Mike Bradford has declared a financial interest in item 15.1.1 as the report relates to my contract of employment. Councillors, does anyone else have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. In item number 10.3.3, revocation of various local planning policies and impartiality interests, as there may be some residents within the Zinnia Cove area who may be known to me.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, any other interest to declare this evening? No, okay. That brings us to item 6, which is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice. That is nil for this evening. Item 6.2 is public question time itself. And I now open public question time at 7 minutes past 6 p.m. We have received 2 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting. So I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Barry Drake of South Perth to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
My name is Barry Drake. I live at unit number 3, 2 Scenic Crescent, South Perth. Good evening, Mr Mayor. Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the gallery, and also the people out there listening on YouTube. Good evening. This month, my questions relate to the underground power, South Perth and Hurlingham project area. Question 1. The council's answer to my question number 1 last month was that my calculations for the network charge for the undergrounding of the power lines were incorrect. However, your answer went on to say that I had not considered the number of dwellings on the properties. Where in the ordinary council meeting minutes of the 28th of June 2022 does it say that the number of dwellings on the properties must be considered?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Lecoq, could I send that your way? Oh, Mr. Adams, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Council Resolution 0622/084 of 28th of June 2022 adopted a network charge based on per unit or dwelling gross rental value. Further to this, following your regular request for clarification and to clarify its intention, Council at the ordinary council meeting of 27th of June 2023 adopted resolution 0623/116, which under paragraph 1 Roman numeral 10 clarifies the implementation of the underground power charges in respect of a property having multiple units or dwellings on a single site or single title. The network charge is imposed on each unit or dwelling, calculated by reference to the amount of the GRV of the property divided by the number of units or dwellings on the property.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Your second question, Mr Drake?
Well, that doesn't answer the question, but anyway, number two, question
It
number
did,
two.
Mr Drake, but please proceed with your second question.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Question number two. How were the owners of Granny Flats charged for the undergrounding of the power network service charge?
Thank you. Mr Adams?
Same as everyone else, per unit or dwelling.
Thank you, Mr Adams. And your final question, Mr Drake?
Question number three. Included in last year's rates notice to all landholders or landowners in the City of South Perth and Hurlingham project area was the flyer incorporating the network charge table. Why was this flyer produced by the city if the use of the table was incorrect?
Thank you. Mr Adams?
The table is correct. It shows the charge per unit or dwelling.
Thank you, Mr Adams, and thank you, Mr Drake, for your questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome Mr Mark Hands of Cottesloe. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you and good evening. This relates to item 12.2. The first question is, why is the vision and intent of Joel Oldham's plan developed back in the 1960s being revisited today?
Thank you. Ms Amprima?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is a significant number of documents to be considered in conjunction with the review of the Urban Forest Strategy, which have been developed over an extended period of time. These are to varying degrees still in operation currently. This review of the Urban Forest Strategy is intended to look at all available material and consider what is relevant at this point in time from those documents. The revised Urban Forest Strategy will provide a baseline for moving forward and will only draw on relevant elements of existing documents and consolidate them into one place. Once drafted, the revised Urban Forest Strategy will be made available for public feedback.
Thank you, Ms Amprima. And your second question, Mr Hands?
This is corollary to the first one. Given the South Perth Esplanade foreshore is now greatly changed from then, and the Oldham plan was not adopted then, why is the council now considering incorporating the vision and intent of Oldham's plan into the draft urban forest strategy included in the 23-24 annual budget?
Thank you. Ms Amprima?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Elected members can bring a notice of motion for council to consider. What council resolves is a matter for council.
Thank you, Ms Amprima, and thank you, Mr Hands, for your questions.
Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to check with governance to see if there's any late questions in the tray. No, there's not. Okay. In that case, I now close public question time at 13 minutes past 6 p.m. We move on to item 7, which is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes, and item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held on 27 June 2023. I'm about to look for a mover in a second. Councillor Choi?
Yes, I've just got a question, please, before that's moved, if that's okay.
Fire away.
Yes, I've just noted the list of workshops has been updated to include the May ones. I'm missing from the June minutes, which is great. So thanks to the administration officers for that. I'm just wondering, for the annual budget item at 10.4.3 on page 65, should it not say what the council decision is? It doesn't actually say council decision next to the alternative motion, which I believe, just looking at the votes, that was the motion passed.
Who should I send that to? Mr Adams or Ms Fry? Just give us a moment there, Councillor Choi.
Councillor Choi, can you repeat your question, please?
At page 65 of the minutes, it states the alternative motion. I believe it doesn't say and council decision.
That's the only words that are missing, and council
Yeah.
decision. It's still got the resolution number and everything like
Yeah.
that. So
So I'm just wondering whether that should be updated to reflect that, so people know instantly what was the council, because it's quite a long,
yes,
item. Thank
we
you.
can do that.
Thank you, Ms Fry, and thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, any other questions before I move or seek a mover and a seconder? No. Okay. So in that case, I'm going to seek a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 27 June 2023 be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Anyone to move? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillor Manolas to second. Councillors, please cast your votes.
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Russell.
Yeah, I believe there's a breach of 10.3 unopposed business or 10.5 order of debate.
Can you be more specific?
Well, 10.3 unopposed business or 10.5 order of debate. We've gone from a mover to seconder straight to a vote. This is a substantive or a substantial motion or a formal motion, and therefore 10.3 and 10.5 comes into play.
Who should I seek some advice from on that point, Ms Fry or Mr Adams? All right, just wait for a moment for Mr Bradford. All right, Councillor Russell, I'll indulge you. We've never debated whether or not we ought to pass the minutes of a meeting before, but if that's something that you're really keen on doing, then I'm happy to allow it. We've had a mover and a seconder. Does anyone
I'm
wish?
sorry, I've raised a point of order, so you need to explain what your ruling is. Is there been a breach or has there not been a breach?
I don't think there's been a breach, Councillor Russell. I've sought advice. I'm happy to indulge you if you really want to debate the minutes.
Okay, what was that advice? Was there a breach or was there not a breach?
Oh, Councillor Russell, okay. Mr Adams, you able to provide advice to the meeting on Councillor Russell's point that we ought to be debating the minutes or not?
It's up to the mayor to rule on the point of order. The mayor's ruling on the point of order, that's in line with the standing orders. I don't think there's anything that's been breached in the standing orders. You've asked the mayor to rule on a point of order, he's ruling on it.
Are you satisfied, Councillor Russell?
So to be clear, your ruling is that there's been no breach of the standing orders in this respect in terms of a formal motion and therefore bring it to 10.3 or 10.5. It's the standing orders.
Councillor Russell, where are you going with this? Well, you've been an elected member for almost 4 years now. We've consistently gone through these meetings and approved the minutes in the same format, in the same way for, well, as long as I've been an elected member. You've never once raised issue with it previously. I'm not sure what you're trying to achieve at the moment.
Well, that's correct, Mr Mayor, but you know, it is incorrect. And all I want now is that the standing orders be used correctly. So
Well,
you
I've ruled on that, Councillor Russell.
Oh,
and
okay, so to be clear, are you stating then that there's been no breach of the standing orders in terms of Part 10?
Councillor Russell, you've had your say. I'm ruling that we're moving on. Councillors, please cast your
No,
votes.
there's no ruling of moving on. The ruling is,
Councillor
have you
Russell, I
breached
have
or not
ruled.
breached
We
the
are
standing
moving
orders?
on. I'm the presiding member. You are not. We are moving on. We are going to the vote on the minutes. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Abrandis, how do you vote on whether or not we approve the minutes for last month's meeting?
In the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. That was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to item 7.2, which is notes of briefing. I call for someone to move that council notes that the following council briefings and workshops were held. That's 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, council agenda briefing, 18 July 2023. Can I have a mover, please? I think Councillor Warland was first and then Councillor Manolis to second. Councillors, please cast your votes. And how do you vote, Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
In the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. Item 8 is presentations, of which item 8.1 is the first sub-item. That's petitions. There's nil this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts and awards presented to council. That's nil for this evening. And item 8.3 is deputations. And deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held 18 July 2023. We now move on to item 9, which is method of dealing with agendas. I wish to advise that the following agenda item is a new report and was not presented to the council agenda briefing held 18 July 2023. That is item 10.4.3, acquisition of Old Manning Library. I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda were discussed at the July council agenda briefing. Mr Bradford.
Mr Mayor, with the exception of item 10.4.3 that you've identified, all others were considered at the agenda briefing.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. So, with the exception of those items withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean that the officer recommendation will be adopted as is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn. The first is item 10.3.2. That's proposed 6x4 storey group dwelling, lot 274, number 31 Leonora Street, Como. The reason for that is Councillor Stephen Russell has an amended motion. Item 10.3.3, a revocation of various local planning policies. The reason for that is Councillor Mary Choi has an alternative motion and Councillor Ken Manolis has declared a proximity interest. And there's item 10.4.3, acquisition of Old Manning Library site. And the reason for that is it is a new report. Councillors, does anyone else wish to withdraw any other item for discussion this evening? That's a no? Okay. So I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those items are item 10.3.1, draft payment in lieu of parking plan. Item 10.3.4, minor modifications to the existing local planning policies. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments, June 2023. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, June 2023, interim. Can I have a mover for those items, please, councillors? Councillor Warland, thank you. Someone to second. Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Abrandis, how would you like to vote?
In the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So, that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving on to those reports that have been identified to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. So now we're moving on to item 10. And the first report to be withdrawn for discussion this evening is 10.3.2, proposed 6 by 4 storey group dwellings, lot 274, number 31 Leonora Street, Como. The reason for that is Councillor Stephen Russell has an amended motion. We do have an officer recommendation before us. Councillor Russell, did you wish to have someone move the officer recommendation first before you move your amended motion? Okay. Councillor Cridlin, did you wish to move the officer recommendation, or were you asking a question?
Just forget I even moved my hand.
Okay. Well, we do have an officer recommendation before us. There is no alternative motion that I've received. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Worland, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillor Worland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an interesting one. It's a reasonably straightforward proposal. So I think in that regard, and in the assessment of the planning team, and this is very much my words, not theirs, but this appears to be on face value largely, almost entirely compliant with the planning frameworks that have been implemented. And I would note there's several frameworks that we are dealing with on this one. We've got TPS 6, we've got the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan, there's a couple of state planning policies injected in as is standard. There's not a whole heap to say about the proposal itself here because it is, as I say, relatively straightforward. However, I do note that this proposal in many respects, I think, gives us a good idea of perhaps why we have such difficulty at the moment in housing supply, and that does in fact have an impact for this city in meeting our expectations and obligations to deliver a certain level of housing. So I might, in the time available to me on this, just spell out a couple of observations I think that this proposal demonstrates about the broader WA planning system. You look at the attachments for tonight, and there are over 150 pages worth of reports, assessments and statements, plans, drawings and photos for 6 townhouses. 6 townhouses which, as I say, are largely almost entirely compliant with the planning framework, for which the proponent deserves credit for that. What I find difficult is something so simple and straightforward in an area that has been identified as needing to and is capable of supporting that development finds it so hard to have to meet the requirements under the broader planning system to justify why they should do that. I think this is something that really does need to be called out because this does have an impact. It has an impact, as I say, not just on our ability to meet those targets in a timely way. It does have an impact on the effectiveness and operation of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan. And when I speak to locals, including some who actually live in quite close proximity to this proposal, they love the area. They can afford to rent there for now, but they can't afford to move there permanently because they can't afford housing. And we know there's a massive housing supply issue right across the country at the moment. So you've got 150 pages plus for that. We then look to the conditions that are proposed to be set here, and there's 17 and potentially 18 if the amended motion is carried, on top, which in and of themselves require a bunch of new plans to be developed and a set of separate approvals to be sought and granted before they can even get a building permit. So the point I'm really trying to make here is that this really, in so many ways, is exhibit A to Z of the challenges that we're facing to deliver housing at the moment. That a straightforward and simple proposal could have to go through so many hoops, such a volume of red, green tape and every form of tape imaginable. It does concern me. And to that end, I would just conclude by saying that it would have been helpful in this instance to have had the proponents give a deputation to us at the agenda briefing. I think all proponents for development applications that come before us should do that if they can, because it actually helps us to understand their proposal a bit better. It helps us to understand the design elements and their thinking behind it. It gives us an opportunity to kind of question them and understand these things a little bit better, so that we can kind of deal with these issues in a more smooth and efficient way. And also to actually understand the time and the cost impact of having to develop all of those different documents, which is not required by us necessarily, but which we have to pass on as essentially an extension of the state's planning bureaucracy in these matters. We know that time and cost of those documents has to be borne by someone, and in the end, that is borne by home buyers. So that is the point I was seeking to make there, and I'll finish just by thanking Ms Shaw, I know she's not here, and Ms Mullen and the governance team for acting on that request to provide some more visibility and clarity around who the proponents are in the report. It makes it easier for us to understand who's behind these things, and makes it easier for us to declare an interest if we so have one, and without having to spend hours going through ASIC records.
Thank you, Councillor Warland. Councillor D'Souza, you're the seconder. Did you wish to say anything?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nothing further to add on this one. I think Councillor Warland has covered it comprehensively.
Right, thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillor Russell, I understand you have an amended motion. Did you wish to move that at this time?
Yes, I do. Thank you. 115 pages, was it? I think I read all of them. Okay, I'll get straight to the point. So my amending motion that pursuant to the provisions of the City of South Perth Town Planning Scheme number 6 and the MRS, the application for development approval for 6 by 4 storey group dwellings on lot 274, number 31 Leonora Street, Como, be approved subject to the following conditions. And I'll just go straight to the amending my condition, which is number 18, which is prior to the submission of a building permit application, certification completed by a Livable Housing Australia assessor confirming that the detailed design of 2 dwellings is compliant with the silver level of the Livable Housing Design Guidelines produced by Livable Housing Australia must be submitted to and approved by writing to the City of South Perth.
All right, thank you, Councillor Russell. I'll just see if anyone wishes to second that amended motion. Does anyone wish to second? Councillor Navard, thank you. Councillor Russell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. So, yes, the reason for change is that the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan requirement 1.15 states that in the Q3, development be designed in accordance with Residential Design Codes Volume 2, Element 4.9 with respect to universal design. The objective for Element 4.9 is for development to include dwellings with universal design features to which an acceptable outcome is that either a silver or platinum level of the Livable Housing Design Guidelines be incorporated into the design. Although the application is silent with respect to the specifics to how both the objective and the acceptable outcome are to be met, the City has advised that the application has been assessed against the requirements. To this effect, a condition is required to ensure that silver level attributes, for example, Element 6 reinforcement of bathroom and toilet walls, are included within the construction. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Navard, you're seconding the amended motion. Anything that you'd like to say?
Probably not at this time. I can confirm that I've read all the material and I have also attended the site and had a look. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended motion proposed by Councillor Russell? Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor, and it is with some level of regret because I don't think it's a bad motion. I actually thank Councillor Russell for bringing it. I think, again, it just highlights some of the challenges we're facing here. And also, it's a good indication as far as the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan goes and the broader planning framework goes of the disconnect between how our planning system is designed to operate, how it does operate, and then how our community expects it to operate. We've already heard, and the city officers have confirmed that this is a substantially compliant request, and they've proposal rather, and they've assessed it against all of those criteria, including that listed here. I don't believe there's a necessity for this condition to be added, not only on that basis, but because it's not like we're seeking to implement a concession here because they're trying to vary or depart, far and wide from what the planning framework allows them to deliver on that site. But I do sympathise with the frustration that these issues often bring when the community has an expectation of a very prescriptive planning framework, when in actual fact the truth is, whether people are prepared to acknowledge it publicly or formally, is that our planning framework, for all of the consultation and engagement that goes into it, is actually quite flexible and by necessity. You need to have that in order to ensure that you can encourage development in certain sites and in conditions where they're difficult, and likewise you need to ensure there's a variety of built form and development outcomes. And so in terms of tying that point to this, I'm not sure it's necessary, and I think it is just, again, another example of the confusion and the unfortunate misunderstanding that, that sometimes arises with our planning system when people think that something is very prescriptive when actually it's never intended to be read or implemented as prescriptively as it is on a page.
Thank you, Councillor Warland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour? Councillor Cridland.
I'm sorry, I'd just like to ask a question of the staff if I can.
By all means.
Apologise to the staff if there's been a report or a bulletin or something about this that I haven't read. But just looking at the new condition 18 and the reasons given for it, it's suggested that there be a certification by a Livable Housing Australia assessor to show that it's compliant with the silver level of the Livable Housing Design Guidelines. And then the reasons say that the city has advised the application has been assessed against the requirement in the residential design codes with respect to universal design. So my question is, was the application assessed against the silver level Livable Housing Design Guidelines already? If so, will the certification achieve anything more? Do you have, thirdly, do you have any idea of how much certification costs or delays a project? And is condition 18 the sort of standard condition that you might impose, for example, in an RAR for a JDAP report? If you've got answers to any of those, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Ms Mullins, can I send that your way?
You can, thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Cridland, and you've not missed a bulletin item on this particular element. So that, as Councillor Russell correctly pointed out, the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan does reference the Livable Housing Design Guidelines, with the objective being that an assessment is undertaken with universal design features. So what officers do is they will look at the entry point. There's 7 elements in the silver level. They will look at, for example, the entry point in this particular development. There's a level entry from the garage through to the ground floor, which is then through to the main entrance. There's also a lift in every unit as well. So it really satisfies most of the 7 elements in the Livable Housing silver level. What it doesn't do and what this condition will achieve, it may do, but officers through the planning assessment don't undertake this assessment, is again, as Councillor Russell points out, element 6 is reinforced walls around the toilet, shower and bath to support the safe installation of grab rails at a later date. So that's an element that officers at the planning stage would not necessarily assess. So that's something over and above what the planners would be concerned with in their assessment of universal design features per se. This is a standard condition, and this is a condition that council has attached to decisions. It's been undertaken recently, and it is a standard condition for JDAP approvals as well. Varies from 2 to 6 units being compliant. And I think the third question was the cost. I'm not aware of the cost of this or the delay that would be incurred by the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullins. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Russell's amended motion? Councillor Choi.
I've just got a question, please, Mr Mayor.
By all means.
Just wondering if there are any implications with this amendment that
Ms.
haven't
Mullins.
been raised already.
Through the chair, thank you. Thank you for the question. No, I wouldn't foresee any implications particularly. This is a condition that has been attached to a number of recent decisions in relation to group dwellings.
Thank you, Ms Mullins. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak for the amended motion?
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yes. Firstly, I have a question, Mr Mayor. So,
By all means.
with regard to the 7 core design features and elements that were noted, how many of those is the city satisfied that would actually be satisfying or be compliant with?
Ms Mullins.
Thank you, through the chair. The city is of the view that certainly 6 can be achieved. The element that officers, again, at the planning stage are not aware whether it can be achieved or not, sorry, it can be achieved, whether it's actually proposed at this stage, is element 6, which is reinforced walls around the toilet, shower and bath, because that would be considered a building permit stage, not a development application stage, but it's certainly achievable. It's, as I say, it's just not part of a development application consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullins. Councillors, any further questions before I ask if anyone else wants to speak, either for or against? No. In that case, I might ask one question myself. Ms Mullins, I haven't had a terrific amount of time to consider the amended motion. Is this a reasonable planning condition? Is it something that the city officers would either recommend or, I suppose, not warn us not to apply under the circumstances?
Thank you through the chair. Yes, it is a reasonable condition. It satisfies the test, and council have attached it to recent decisions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms Mullin. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the amended motion? That's a no. Well, there hasn't been any debate, but Councillor Russell, if you wanted to say anything. Oh, Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yes, sorry, Mr Mayor, just one more question for the administration as well. So with regard to achieving the platinum level, what would we not be achieving as it currently stands right now?
Ms Mullin?
Through the chair, I would actually have to look and see what the platinum level is. I just have the silver level in front of me, so you would have to bear with me.
Just while we're waiting, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, is this because you're contemplating an amended motion, or?
No, Mr Mayor, I'm not contemplating a further amendment.
Right, thank you. Ms Mullin.
Thank you through the chair, and I apologise for the delay. There are actually 15 criteria for a platinum level. My very brief assessment, they are all achievable. There are, for example, element 14 is windowsills are installed at a height that enables home occupants to view the outdoor space from either a seated or standing position. So you're starting to look at design elements that would have to be incorporated in the proposal. So I'd have to again look at the design to see whether that's been included, but it's not overly onerous, platinum level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullin. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to ask any further questions or speak either for or against the amended motion? No. Councillor Russell, there hasn't really been anyone speaking against, but did you wish to say anything by way of winding up? I think he asked a question, Councillor Russell. Oh, sorry, my bad, Mr. Councillor Warland. Yes, you're right. Apologies. Councillor Russell, you have an opportunity to wind up now if you'd like to.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yes, Mrs Mullins is correct, is that there's only certain elements of the livable housing in Australia that can be seen at the planning DA phase, and there's other elements that cannot be seen unless it's in the construction phase, and hence the requirement for this condition. So now, a good way to increase housing stock is to, in my opinion, to increase the movement of people through the different phases of life to suitable homes. So, you know, having universal access to an increase of universal access to homes is the best way to perhaps to get retirees from an R15, R20 housing stock into a group housing such as this, and therefore freeing up these homes to other generations. That would increase the level of housing availability within Australia. So this is universal access is something not to be ignored, and hence the requirement for condition. Look, I believe that the Property Council, even the Property Council of Australia, would be agreeable to this. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, I'm about to put the amended motion to the vote, so it's not the substantive, it's Councillor Russell's amended motion. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Abrandis, how would you like to vote?
In the affirmative for the amendment, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I think I'm just waiting on one more vote. There we go. So Councillor Russell's amended motion has passed 8 votes to 1. For those who are, the benefit of those who are listening via YouTube, those in favour were Councillor Russell, Councillor Navard, Councillor Choi, Councillor Manolis, myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza and Councillor Cridland. Those against were Councillor Warland. Okay, so the officer recommendation has now been amended in accordance with Councillor Russell's amended motion, adding that new condition 18. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the amended substantive motion? That's a no. I'll ask Councillor Warland, who moved the original substantive motion, if he has anything to say by way of winding up. No? In that case, councillors, we're putting the amended substantive motion to the vote. Please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Abrandis, how would you like to vote on that?
In the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. All right, that was carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening, which is item 10.3.3, entitled Revocation of Various Local Planning Policies. Councillor Mary Choi has an alternative motion on this item. Councillor Ken Manolis declared a proximity interest, so we'll just give Councillor Manolis an opportunity to leave the chamber. All right, so for the benefit of the tape, Councillor Manolis has now left the chamber. Councillor Choi, I can see your alternative motion here. Did you wish to start by moving the alternative motion?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, if you could please read the motion and then we'll see about getting a seconder.
Thank you. That council, in accordance with the provisions of Schedule 2, Clause 6 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015, revokes, with the exception of 9, Policy P351.14, Sydney Cove Residential Design Guidelines, the following planning policies. And then the policies are listed 1 to 8. Do you want me to read each one or?
No, if you can just say what the change is.
Lovely, thank you. So the reasons for my change is, number 1, unlike policy P351.12, pertaining to the development guidelines for 12 Bradshaw and 8 Conakry being around Manning Hub, which has been completed.
Hold on, Councillor Choi, you've jumped the gun. I've got to see
sorry.
about a seconder before you go into the reasons.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to second Councillor Choi's alternative motion? Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillor Choi, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for being a little bit overzealous there. Okay, so reasons for the change. Request is number 1, unlike policy P351.12 pertaining to the development guidelines for 12 Bradshaw and 8 Conakry being around Manning Hub, which has been completed, the Sydney Cove estate for which policy P351.14 applies remains largely incomplete, with around 18 residential lots and 1 group dwelling still undeveloped. It is thus the view that as the area is not fully developed, this policy still has utility. This is especially the case since the provisions provided within the policy are not as included in the current Town Planning Scheme 6 or Draft Local Planning Scheme 7, and are also somewhat different to the provisions provided within the R codes and Clause 67 of the regulation. Point 2. A restrictive covenant also exists on the single residential titles of lots within the Sydney Cove estate, and only on single residential titles, as placed by the developer Richard Noble, which requires owners of those single residential titles to obtain the developer's endorsement prior to lodging an application for development approval. This is to ensure certain high standards of development are achieved throughout the area, from the establishment of the estate through to completion. It is for this reason I believe the restricted covenant is not set to expire until 2030. Point 3. The restricted covenant is not registered on lots that are group dwellings within the Sydney Cove estate. However, including but not necessarily limited to the undeveloped group dwelling site lot 288 at number 38 Cygnus Parade, coded R80 in TPS 6 and LPS 7. This is where the city's policy P351.4 Sydney Cove residential design guidelines come in, as it sets the development guidelines for these group dwelling lots as well as the single residential lots. Hence, if the policy is revoked, there will be no guidelines for group dwellings within Sydney Cove as currently exists. Point 4. Furthermore, the restricted covenant for the single residential lots includes some, but not necessarily all of the matters covered in the guidelines, as set out in Clause 3 of the policy. And as such, the policy still serves a purpose in maintaining the very consistency and clarity it set out to achieve with the remaining undeveloped single residential lots within the Sydney Cove estate. Point 5. The policy P351.14 guidelines include, but are not limited to, defining the setbacks for group dwellings as well as for single dwellings within the Sydney Cove estate. Specifically at clause 10.6.9b of the policy, the primary street setback is set at 4 metre average and 2 metre minimum. As the land for lot 288 at number 38 Cygnus Parade is coded R80 under the current TPS 6 and draft LPS 7, I believe the State Planning Policy 7.3 Residential Design Codes Volume 2 Apartments Table 2.1 Primary Control Table would apply if this policy is revoked, which indicates a primary street setback of 2 metres instead of the average 4 metres as prescribed by the policy. Point 6. The development of group dwelling lots within the Sydney Cove estate, such as lot 288, number 38 Cygnus Parade, should be consistent with the existing developments, including but not necessarily limited to neighbouring group dwelling lot 287 at number 40 Cygnus Parade, which has a setback of 4 metre average, 2 metre minimum from the primary road, Cygnus Parade. Point 7. Without an average of a 4 metre setback for future development, at least until all lots in the estate have been developed, the bulk and scale of a development, especially of a group dwelling with a coding of R80 in a rather narrow street with narrow footpaths, will potentially affect the amenity of the area, impact and be inconsistent with the existing built form for both single and group dwelling lots, and go against the intent of the restricted covenant and policy. And my last point, point 8, if some clauses in policy P351.14 Sydney Cove residential design guidelines are outdated, it is the view that these can be amended to reference the new Building Code of Australia and LPS 7 when approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Russell, you're the seconder. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I actually have a question, Mrs. Mullen. I understood that number 38 Cygnus Parade, which is zoned R80, was actually approved as a multiple dwelling complex. Is that correct, or not a group dwelling complex?
Ms. Mullen?
Through the chair, that's correct. Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Okay, and do you know what the current phase of that development is? When was it developed, and when's the expiry date for that approval?
Thank you, through the chair. This is 38 Cygnus Parade? Yes, thank you. So that was, there was an amendment to the approval in May of this year, and it has a 2-year approval, so it can commence any time within the next 2 years. I'm not aware that they've submitted a building permit at this stage.
Okay, so there's still an opportunity for them to issue a Form 2 requirement?
Through the chair, yes, they may wish to make an amendment, a further amendment to the development.
Okay, and it's definitely multiple dwelling and not a group dwelling. Does that mean that the setbacks for, because group dwelling is not available for R80, is that correct?
Through the chair, I think this development has a 2 metre average setback, if I'm not, 2 metre setback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Policy requires 4 metres though, doesn't it?
I think my...
Mr. Giddens?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Yes, Councillor Russell, when JDAP approved this, they approved it with a 2 metre setback as opposed to, they disregarded the 4 metres as an average and just went for the 2 metres.
Okay, so this kind of makes this superfluous then. Is that where we're going?
Mr. Giddens?
With respect to, only respect to this lot?
Yes, that's correct. And given that this is the last lot which this pertains to, the minute they put a building licence in, this element will be made redundant.
Okay. Rightio. Oh, I'm in a bit of a dilemma now.
Did you wish to speak, Councillor Russell, or?
I think it's best we just bring it onto the floor. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak against the alternative motion? Councillor Cridland?
I was just wondering if the staff had any general comments that they wished to make before we voted.
Okay. Ms Mullen or Mr Gibbons? Mr Gibbons.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. As explained in the council report, Signia Cove pretty much has been built out. There are a few lots left. The restrictive covenant and the policy are two different elements, and they kind of sit side by side. And the restrictive covenant is applicable to all the single residential lots with the range of elements which are required to be provided in that. With there's only the one group site which remains to be developed. When we went out and we did a site inspection about 6 weeks ago, bunting around the lot, marketing material around the lot. So I would imagine a building licence is probably imminent, but we can't confirm that at this point. The restrictive covenant will continue to cover the design requirements, and the LPP as it stands at the moment is just duplicating a lot of that. So it's just a matter of simplifying it. That's about all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gibbons. Councillor Cridland, your light's still on. Did you have another question? Okay. I might ask a question myself, and I'm not sure if it's to Ms Mullen or Mr Gibbons, but I think this was answered by the report, but indulge me. The restrictive covenant, according to the report at least, is supposed to apply to all lots within the Signia Cove estate, but I see reason 3 of Councillor Choi's alternative motion says the restrictive covenant is not registered on lots that are grouped dwellings within Signia Cove. So I'm a little bit confused. Does the restrictive covenant apply to all lots within the Signia Cove estate, or is Councillor Choi correct when she says that it doesn't apply to group dwellings within the Signia Cove estate?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, essentially the restrictive covenant does not apply to this particular lot. It was not imposed on the lot. The reason why I'm not aware of, it would have been a transaction between the owner of the lot and the land developer as well at the time the development was developed. Regardless of that, the elements of the restrictive covenant with regards to all the ESD requirements, etc., will be picked up through Volume 2 of the R codes.
All right, thank you. So I suppose just to make sure that I've understood you correctly, is anyone going to be advantaged or disadvantaged by the revocation of this policy, or is it effectively redundant at this stage?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. No, in our opinion, there won't be any disadvantage given that there already has been a JDAP decision on this with a development application approved. So we are just waiting for the building licence to come through for that, or an application be made for building licence.
Thank you. That answers my question. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to ask a question or speak either for or against the alternative motion? Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak in favour of Councillor Choi's motion. For me, it's really an issue of timing. I think if the restrictive covenant is going to expire in 2030, it just makes logical sense to align this policy with that date. There have been relatively stringent design and environmental standards for this area, and I think there's no harm in leaving it as is. I think the question was asked, it won't advantage or disadvantage anyone. So I think out of an abundance of caution. I mean, there really isn't too great a risk for just leaving the policy on foot. So I think we should be supporting Councillor Choi's alternative motion.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually want to speak in favour of this, again, for similar reasons as Councillor D'Souza. I think there's no harm in actually the retention of this requirement, given that the restrictive covenant actually does prescribe essentially design criteria that should be satisfied with regards to development. So I think in the absence of that, we still actually have property that would need to give this consideration, that we should actually be supporting this amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, anyone else to speak either for or against? Councillor Navard.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, really, I guess I'll be speaking in favour of it simply because of the belt and braces approach to planning, and once again, just to do with the expiry time and making sure that we've just got it in place in case something goes pear-shaped. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, anyone else to speak either for or against? No. Councillor Choi, did you wish to say anything by way of winding up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, and thanks for some of the feedback received from the city. I hadn't received that prior to this meeting. Okay, so it is premature and somewhat risky, in my view, to revoke a planning policy which may still serve a purpose, especially when that purpose is to ensure stringent design and environmental standards for new builds in what is still a fairly new community estate in the city, and which gives both residents and current residents and new residents to the area clarity and security in knowing what they have or will be buying into. As raised during debate, there may still be some uncertainty. Given the restricted covenant does not apply to the grouped or multiple dwelling, whichever it may be, and the policy may set out what is beyond the scope of the restricted covenant, and the restricted covenant is set to expire in 2030, not now in 2023, that time then, not now, seems to be the opportune time to review this policy, or if, the area is fully established by then and there's no need for it, it's redundant. I also note contact received from residents voicing their concerns over the revocation of this policy. So hence I urge councillors to please support this motion on behalf of those Sydney Cove residents to maintain assurance to them that their amenity will not be compromised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Okay, councillors, I'm about to put the alternative motion to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. Oh, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, how would you like to vote on this one?
In the affirmative, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Just waiting on one more vote. Oh, you're quite right, yes. In that case, the alternative motion was passed unanimously, and thank you for the reminder. Would someone like to go and let Councillor Manolis back in, please? And for the benefit of the tape, Councillor Manolis has just rejoined us. Welcome back, Councillor Manolis. All right, the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening is item 10.4.3, which is acquisition of Old Manning Library site. That's a new report, that's why it's been pulled out for this evening. We have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any amended or alternative motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor Worland, thank you. Before I invite Councillor D'Souza to speak, does anyone oppose the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, if no one opposes this motion, then I'll simply use my powers under the standing orders to declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. All right. That's all of the items from item 10 that were withdrawn for discussion this evening. That brings us to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Does anyone have a leave of absence application that they'd like to submit? Councillor Navard?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like leave of absence for the periods the 12th to the 17th of August.
Inclusive?
Inclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Cridland?
I seek a leave of absence for the period 24 August 2023 to 8 September 2023.
Thank you. Inclusive? Yeah. Anyone else? Councillor Brenda Brandis?
No, Mr Mayor.
All right. In that case, I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder for a notice of motion that the leave of absence applications received from Councillor Jennifer Navard for the period of 12 August 2023 to 17 August 2023 inclusive, and from Councillor Glenn Cridland for the period of 24 August 2023 to 8 September 2023 inclusive, be granted. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Choi, thank you. Seconded by Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Brandis, how would you like to vote on that?
And again, in the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. The first is item 12.1. That's a notice of motion from me, Mayor Greg Milner, entitled Engagement with the Wesley South Perth Hockey Club to identify an alternative location within the City of South Perth for co-located facilities. I will move that. I'll read the notice of motion recommendation, which reads as follows. Paragraph 1. The City CEO be instructed to engage with the Wesley South Perth WASP Hockey Club, hereafter club, Wesley College and other relevant stakeholders with a view towards finding an appropriate location within the City of South Perth for, subparagraph A clubhouse, subparagraph B, grass hockey grounds, and subparagraph C, synthetic hockey turf grounds appropriate for the needs of the club. And then paragraph 2 reads, that a report to Council on the above be presented to Council for consideration at an appropriate time, but by no later than the February 2024 Ordinary Council meeting. Is there anyone willing to second that notice of motion? Councillor Cridland, thank you. Before I go into the reasons, councillors, is there anyone who opposes this notice of motion?
I have a question, Mr Mayor.
By all means, far away.
Thank you. Just a question for the administration. Obviously, we've previously done some work with assisting and working with the WASPs with regard to locations. Would the administration be able to indicate if we did have any land available or several pieces of land available that would be able to accommodate this particular motion request? So to include a clubhouse, a grass hockey grounds, and also synthetic turf grounds as well, in addition to parking. So obviously quite a significant piece of land is required. Just an indication from the administration if we do have this sort of land available in one or multiple locations, please.
Mr Bradford.
In the discussions we've had, we've identified a number of possibilities, including probably some what I'd classify as maybe novel or innovative approaches to how this facility could be housed. And so they're the sorts of things that we'll be exploring over in the coming months.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. So, councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against this notice of motion? I'll just check in with governance. Am I still able to use my powers to declare it carried even though there's been a question? I can? All right. Well, if there's no one who wishes to speak against, then I'll simply use my powers under the standing orders to declare the motion carried, and we'll move on to item 12.2. Now, this is a notice of motion by Councillor Stephen Russell entitled Inclusion of the South Perth Esplanade Foreshore into the financial year 2023-2024 budgeted urban forest strategy review. I have declared and so has Councillor Warland, we've both declared financial and proximity interests in this item, so we will be leaving the chamber momentarily, and Councillor Ken Manolis has declared a proximity interest, so I believe he'll be leaving the chamber as well. So I'm about to vacate and give up my seat to the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Blake D'Souza. I know there's a lot of interest in the chamber on this item, and there's probably some strong feelings on it. I'm just going to ask that everyone be courteous and treat everyone else as you would wish to be treated yourself. I'm sure you will. With that, if Councillor D'Souza, if you'd like to take my spot, and if someone could come and get us when the debate is done.
Thank you. The Mayor and Councillor Warland have now left the chamber, as has Councillor Manolis, and we are on to item 12.2, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Stephen Russell. Councillor Russell, do you wish to move your motion? And then we'll see about a seconder.
Yes, thank you. I move that the CEO be instructed to 1. Research for and include the plan sketches developed by landscape architect John Oldham in the 1960s as one of the informing documents, and where relevant and practical to the current context, the vision and intent of this plan sketches be incorporated into the updated draft urban forest strategy included in the 23-24 annual budget. 2. As part of the draft urban forest strategy, include the following land parcels which are adjacent to or inclusive of the South Perth Esplanade, and consider point 1 above specifically for these land parcels. A. Landgate pin 1052648. B. Landgate pin 146195. C. Landgate pin 146322. D. Landgate pin 146324. E. The lots that make up the South Perth Esplanade Road Reserve from its most northern end to its southern end, adjacent to number 101 South Perth Esplanade. 3. Separate to but in parallel with development of an updated urban forest strategy, develop a concept consistent with points 1 and 2 above that includes a high-level esplanade tree canopy plan which shall, as a minimum, A. Deliver a canopy that runs the length of the esplanade to partially emulate John Oldham's 1960s vision for a series of botanic gardens encircling Perth Water from the University of WA around the riverfront to Mill Point, relevant to the current development and environment context. B. Notwithstanding the list of native tree species already identified in the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan, where possible include other native shrubs and tree species and complementary plantings that would emulate a May Gibbs themed landscape that provides diversity of species. C. Enable the future reduction in turf areas whilst maintaining the objectives of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy. D. Provide intermittent canopy shade over the pedestrian footpath. 4. Investigate with the City of Perth, the relevant authority, State Department for Kings Park and expert third parties, interpretive and wayfinding signage to connect South Perth Heritage House, John Oldham Park and Kings Park Botanic Gardens via the Esplanade Canopy Plan to promote both May Gibbs and John Oldham. Just a modification to point 5 to avoid any ambiguity. Report back to Council at a future workshop on all points above with the draft urban forest strategy, with the intention of taking all items into a public consultation process.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Governance, have we captured that? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Russell. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Russell's motion? A seconder for Councillor Russell's motion. No to second Councillor Russell's motion.
Mr. Presiding Member,
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
yes, I'd like to second Councillor Russell's notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor Russell, if you'd like to proceed with your reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. The reasons for the motion are as follows. 1. The city has been recognised as one of the state's leading water-wise local governments, having recently earned a gold endorsement by the Water Corp. However, the expansive turfed areas of and adjacent to the South Perth Esplanade, which are of a passive parks and recreational zone nature, are an example of not what a water-wise local government should reflect. This discrepancy will become even the more stark, and indeed the practicality of sustaining such turfed areas the more difficult when the state government will more likely than not require the city to reduce its water licence consumption. 2. Without doubt, the hotter periods of the year, the areas of and adjacent to the South Perth Esplanade are not used by the public to their full extent due to the lack of shade.
Sorry, order, please. We are going to hear everyone out and hear everyone's views. Whether or not we agree with them or not, I think we should just remember to show order and respect. Thank you, Councillor Russell.
This is an issue that is actually noted in the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan for nodes N3 and N8, which has gone out for public consultation, which this motion encompasses. Indeed, this issue has caught the attention of the local MLA, Mr. Jeff Baker, who has quoted, "I love our river foreshore, but I also love cool shade on a hot summer's day. We've got a few trees east of Mindirup, but nearly none between Main Street Jetty and the Narrows. Although structural shelters can provide shade, these should be used intermittently, as the best approach for shade is via the use of trees which provide other benefits to the community and local fauna." 3. The implementation of an Esplanade canopy plan that emulates both John Oldham's 1960s vision for a series of botanic gardens and cycling Perth, which I've given a hyperlink, and a May Gibbs themed bush, whilst being connected to Heritage House, John Oldham Park and Kings Park, should be considered as a heritage trail and not only promotes the heritage of South Perth, but adds to the tourism potential of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, as seconded, do you wish to add anything to this item?
Yes, thank you, I do, Mr. Presiding Member.
Please proceed.
Thank you. The parcels of land identified in the notice of motion represent approximately 4.5% of the total land area of Sir James Mitchell Park. We've been advised that water reduction consumption for vegetated areas, depending on the species planted, once established, can reduce water consumption by approximately 20%. Now, we're all very aware that trees are very important because of the influence they have on temperatures in our cities. And larger trees.
Sorry, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. I'll just pause you for a second. I'd just like to urge the gallery that this is obviously a public council debate, and to allow speakers on both sides to have their points heard. We might not agree, and I just urge members of the gallery to hear the fullness of the debate and reserve their views till the end. Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. I'll just reiterate. So trees are very important because they influence the temperature in our cities, and larger trees have a significant cooling capacity due to the evaporation of water from the leaves, and they create shade and they create a habitable environment for all to use. Customisation and diversity are incredibly important. A diverse culture and species that would be used as vegetation along that foreshore would enhance the environment significantly. It would not only increase the amount of fauna that actually visited the area, but it would also assist with the reduction and spread of risks of disease and pests. So as we are quite aware right now, and it's quite evident that we in the city have been affected by the shothole borer, it's become critical that we have more diversity within our plant vegetation. Now, the Perth Water Bunneen-Baroo Locality Plan is an initiative that the city is actually engaged on, along with 7 other local governments and also government agencies. And this is an active role that we should be considering to take with regard to management of our foreshores and the waterways along, in particular, the Swan River. Now, before I go any further, it should be noted that Councillor Russell has put forward a motion, and this motion is effectively a report back. Now, Councillor Russell has identified some very important aspects that should be given due consideration, which may have not been given as much consideration in the past. But again, as part of the urban forest strategy that will come up for renewal this year, it is important that we do have a specific focus. So the Perth Water Precinct is evolving, and there are several major projects underway. And this is not only important for the visitors numbers that increase in the area, and also the growing tourists from outside of the actual state, but also commercial ventures. Now, the development of policy with direction, trying to achieve a vision and focusing on respecting both cultural and environmental value on the Perth waterways is quite critical. The precinct plan is intended to set a framework to determine the acceptable developments and uses for the area. But this includes the landscaping aspects, and that is quite critical for what is substantially lacking on that particular area that's been included as part of this motion. Yes, it does need to take into account community aspirations, environmental concerns, but also cultural values. Now, with regard to Perth's population, of course, we are all experiencing water restrictions. We are experiencing a greater consumption of water, and we've also got a growing population. So by 2035, the expectation is that the Perth population will have about another 600,000 people to actually accommodate water supply for.
Sorry, Councillor Brander-Brandis, that's 5 minutes. Do we have a mover to extend the councillor's speaking time by a further 5 minutes? Councillor Russell and seconded by Councillor Navard. Councillors, please cast your vote. And Councillor Brander-Brandis, how do you wish to vote?
In the affirmative.
Thank you. You have a further 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you. So, with the expected population growth of roughly 600,000, over the next 12 years, the demand on water supply is going to be increasing exponentially. So, from about the current 298 gigalitres, it'll go up to 350 gigalitres. That is a significant impact. Now, this, whilst only a small portion of the Sir James Mitchell Park and an even smaller portion of the city of South Perth, is critical because, one, of its location, and also because we actually need to seize every opportunity to actually collectively achieve better outcomes, not in isolation. With regard to the initiatives that are considered under the Perth Water Bunneen-Baroo Locality Plan, we need to take into consideration also valuing not only culture, tourism and recreation, but also the Wadjuk Noongar culture as well, which is actually quite important with regard to the Swan River and this location. Key aspects that we also need to take into account is that we need to maintain the nature and the function of the river under this plan. Now that includes not only what we do with regard to infrastructure and the maintenance along those foreshores, but also the long-term impact of the climate change and also the long-term sea level rising and the impact of erosion. So part of the initiative is to consider landscape and vegetation and to explore opportunities where we could actually expand on wildlife and wildflower through that locality. It is critically important that the flora is impacting the landscape in an appropriate way. What we currently see are a collection of rose gardens and also isolated palm trees, which really don't currently add to that landscape and enhance the environment. So this motion is actually really quite critical. It's really quite important. It is a report back. It is actually not in itself an outcome. But it is really important that we do identify key areas that require significant work and also to take into account other important stakeholders. So the stakeholders being in immediate proximity, so those living within the Peninsula area and on the South Perth Esplanade are very important to any outcome, and this is actually not an outcome at this point in time. But there are a significant number of other stakeholders. So again, it's external visitors, it's participants with regard to the precinct plan to develop the waterways and the landscape for the environment. It's any of the cultural values that should be identified, and it also includes fauna and flora that should actually play a part in actually greening the location. So with regard to this motion, I'm supportive. This is actually a report back. It is part of a broader project and will not itself achieve one outcome, but will be the subject of further consultation. Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member.
Thank you, Councillor Branderer-Brandes. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Russell's motion? Councillor Cridland?
I'm not speaking for or against the motion at this stage, but I have an amendment that I would make to Councillor Russell's motion, but of course only if I had a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. So to confirm, you are moving your amended motion now?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Cridland's amended motion? And then you can... Oh, sorry. Councillor Cridland, if you can read out your amended motion first, and then we'll ask for a seconder.
Sure. And this is a little different to what has been sent around to councillors, so I just ask that they listen because it's not the same as what's written down. The amendment that I would propose is that the notice of motion be amended by deleting paragraph 2 in motion 12.2 and substituting the following. This would be the substitute 2. As part of the draft urban forest strategy, include the public land adjacent to the Swan River from the Narrows Bridge to the Elm Street boundary of the city of South Perth with the town of Victoria Park, and consider point 1 above specifically for that area. That's the same as what's in my written motion, but the additional amendment that I would make or propose is to delete paragraph 3 and 4 of Councillor Russell's motion. But of course, that's only if I've got a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Is there anyone to second Councillor Cridland's amended motion to Councillor Russell's alternative motion?
Sorry, Mr. Presiding Member, I have
Yes,
a question.
by all means.
Thank you. Question for Councillor Cridland, just to clarify, the removal of paragraph 2 would be extending from effectively the Narrows Bridge along the foreshore all the way to Elm Street to the town of Victoria Park?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Quidland.
Thank you. So is there a seconder for Councillor Cridland's amended motion? None. In which case, Councillor Cridland's amended motion lapses and we return to the order of debate for Councillor Russell's substantive motion. So we've had Councillor Russell move and speak. We've had Councillor Brander second and speak. I'll now call if there's anyone to speak against Councillor Russell's motion. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I want to thank everyone who's contacted me expressing an interest in this item. I think I've gotten back to mostly everyone, hopefully everyone, but when you return from leave to hundreds of council emails, plus many more shortly after, it can get a bit difficult getting back around to everyone in a timely manner, but I have done my best to do so. It has unfortunately also felt a bit like a RAF scenario, this item, with a kind of us versus them overlay, which I'm sure was not intended, but just an unfortunate observed outcome. I stress, as I have previously, not that long ago, that I believe people are the primary and most important assets in this city, not facilities nor infrastructure. And just like in nature, we need to work together in harmony as best we can to find the best outcomes for this district. Anything that causes unnecessary friction and angst in our community, no matter how good the intent, and whether it is described as just a report back or not, is difficult for me to support. So in addressing the motion before us, I note firstly that it encompasses nodes 3 and 8 of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan, being Main Street Beach and Esplanade West, as set out in the reasons outlined on page 57 of the meeting agenda. Last time I checked, the city had completed Node 1, being the Main Street Piazza and Promenade, and are now focused on Node 2, the Coos Street Beach area. And as no plans or suggestions of any future works for any further nodes have been raised, this motion may in the first instance be jumping the gun a tad, so to speak. Further to this, the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan 2015, in relation to Node 1, Main Street Piazza and Promenade, outlines as a primary consideration at page 44 the obstruction and retention of vistas. And similarly, in relation to Node 3, Coos Street Beach area, the primary strategy is to improve shade and shelter whilst maintaining vistas. And again, similarly, in relation to Node 8, Esplanade West, the primary strategy is to create opportunities for respite and seating whilst maintaining Perth City vistas. The associated actions listed in the plan for Node 4, Coos Street Beaches, and meeting these shade and vista strategies includes provision of deck chairs and umbrellas. It has been suggested that these action steps are or ought to also be applicable to these other similar nodes. And it is the view that these measures could and should be what Council in the first instance is seeking the City to investigate and implement in at least the short term. It should also be noted that the Foreshore Management Plan was, at least in part, predicated by the results of the South Perth Foreshore Community Survey of 2013, which clearly showed that the number 2 community objective was to maintain vistas on the South Perth Foreshore. Number 1 was encouraging healthy lifestyles, which commentary largely centred on retaining public open space for exercise and recreation. Also, some may have forgotten or be unaware that the South Perth Activity Centre Plan, with increasing high density around the peninsula area, was also, at least in part, predicated on the open space available on the South Perth foreshore, including along the Esplanade. Secondly, the Council endorsed Urban Forest Strategy 2018 to 2023 commits to retaining an existing tree canopy of 16.4%, with an aspirational target of 20%, I believe. According to the WA DPLH, that's the Department of Planning, Land and Heritage, and the WAPC, the West Australian Planning Commission, Urban Tree Canopy Dashboard, last data recording of 2020, so about 3.5 years ago, the tree canopy cover for parks in the suburb of South Perth, not to be confused with the city of South Perth, was sitting at 26%. Road tree canopy was lower at 17%, and on street blocks even lower at 13%. Hence, the view is any focus on increasing the city's tree canopy should first be on the suburbs with lower tree canopy ratios, For example, Manning, which parks recorded a mere 18% canopy cover and 11% for street blocks, as well as on street trees throughout the city, which are within the city's control, and trees on private property, which city officers have repeatedly identified most at risk of canopy loss, and have, together with this council, already pledged to improve by endorsing some of the most proactive tree protection measures in WA through our next local planning scheme 7, currently awaiting the West Australian Planning Commission's approval. Therefore, I believe I readily understand and support the concerns over the city's tree canopy and share the same desires and outcomes as everyone else. I just don't necessarily agree on the modus operandi suggested here tonight.
I'm so sorry, Councillor Choi, that's 5 minutes. I'm happy to move a motion to extend your time by a further 5 minutes. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Navard, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. Councillor Brander-Brandis, how do you wish to vote?
In the affirmative, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brander-Brandis. That is passed unanimously. Councillor Choi, you have a further 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member, and for the Council's indulgence. I also acknowledge that most residents are not opposed to increased shade per se on the South Perth foreshore, including the Esplanade. Just the nature and scale of it is, I think, the concern. In quoting the Lord Mayor of Perth from the West Australia 3rd November 2020 newspaper edition, it's fair to say that we look across at what they have in South Perth with a little bit of envy. One thing they have that we don't is access to the water. They can walk off the footpath to the sand and touch the water. It is therefore the view that people make the choice to visit, use and or stay on the South Perth foreshore, including the Esplanade area, for its accessibility to the water below, the clear skies above and the uninterrupted vistas across. Adding May Gibbs themed native shrubbery around the foreshore, as suggested in the motion, is great. I'm sure people would be supportive of that, as I certainly am, as she still holds relevance in the city. But to build the foreshore out with a John Oldham-style bosque, whose radical vision of the 60s, respectfully by the way, did not seem to get much past the single park on Mounts Bay Road, named after him after he passed, makes little sense. Further, I'm unclear whether it's good governance for councillors to be asking the city administration to expend time, energy and expense on a research project that councillors are not au fait with themselves. Like, who is this John Oldham? And why should his plan and vision inform our city's strategies when he certainly doesn't appear to be informing anyone else's? For all these reasons then, I respectfully cannot support this motion tonight. I reiterate, though, that this is not a vote against trees or a vote for views. It is just about the motion before us, and it is a vote for a balanced perspective. As I do want, as I believe the community wants, some sensible and practical shade solutions around the Mindrup Main Street area, and this is in line with my written queries and requests to the City Administration between 2021 and 2023, following my own community engagement with local residents, including those who live around the South Perth Esplanade area, for which a response I believe was pending the City conducting a shade and shelter audit for the area. Hence my questions raised at the agenda briefing last week. I remain looking forward to liaising further with councillors and the City on this matter and seeing what recommendations the City Administration can present Council and the community with in this regard moving forward, and noting that the City's Strategic Community Plan is also due for a review this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Thank you, Councillor Choi. Do we have anyone to speak in favour of the motion? Anyone else wish to speak on the motion? Councillor Cridland? And if you indicate which way you're speaking.
First of all, when I indicate which way I'm speaking, hopefully that won't mean that people will either boo me or cheer me. I just hope that you'll listen to what I think is relevant considerations to a very important part of the city. I'm going to speak against the motion, and I'm going to say that I think there is some important matters in there which it's a pity can't be saved. My proposal was to take out of it what I thought was useful and could have been used in the Urban Forest Strategy Review that we have budgeted for this year. I think it would be have been useful for us to consider the plans that landscape architect John Oldham had prepared. Who knows, there could have been something quite useful in it, such as the suggestions that we should look at more diverse native flora for some of our tree plantings. I'm not sure that some of the concepts that he has had put to his name, such as having a belt of botanical gardens which are entirely connected all the way around Perth Water, is realistically possible in today's world. And that is one of the reasons why I had suggested deleting paragraphs 3 and 4, because I think it would have been useful to use his thoughts and concepts all the way along the esplanade from the Narrows through to Elm Street, rather than just this one little area. Because I think we should be consistent in how we consider these areas. They're all important in different ways. There's the larger, wider turfed area down in Sir James Mitchell where people play sport, whether it's frisbee or dogs or whatever. And I think we should consider that area as well, and not just the turfed area to the north of the Scented Gardens. I have received an enormous amount of emails from people who have had very strong views both ways. And I do think that in that northern area there is certainly a need for some tree shade, but I don't think that means that people are going to have their views destroyed. I think some of the strength of views has been unfortunate because it stops any movement or progress at all. And it would have been good if we could have taken whatever we could have got out of John Oldham in this review and made a positive difference to the city without getting rid of the open turf spaces that people use to recreate on, without having a forest, a dense, thick black forest that runs along the foreshore as people had been scared of. And I just think that this motion as it is a bridge too far in one step. And I'm not saying that we should take steps to get to where this motion says, because I just don't think it's realistic to have a total linked forest the whole way along this area, as Oldham said. But I do think the intermittent canopy shade, which is also referred to in the motion, would be a very positive aspect for people who recreate in a very hot part of the world, which is getting hotter. We've had the reports in the Sydney Morning Herald only this week that some suburbs in Sydney are 10 degrees hotter than other suburbs because of the amount of tree cover. And a few trees to give people shade would benefit all of us, and I don't think it would destroy what is an iconic view. You can get the same view of the city of Perth from Coode Street, and they've got a number of trees that provide shade for people. And I do hope that everyone can kind of...
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Cridland, that's 5 minutes. I'm happy to move a motion to extend your time by a further 5 minutes. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Choi. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Brandes, how do you wish to vote?
In the affirmative, thank you.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Councillor Cridland, please continue.
I don't intend to be long. I would simply hope that people in the community can, and in council, can make an effort to think of the interests of other people and realise that some of these proposals perhaps for a few trees to allow some shade, perhaps for the consideration of using more diversity in native species, is not going to mean the end of the world. In fact, perhaps it will make our wonderful city, with its wonderful views, an even better place to visit. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillor Navard, you had your hand up earlier. Did you wish to speak on the item? Please proceed.
Thank you. I'm speaking against the motion. My thoughts on the matter are various, and therefore I acknowledge I have somewhat of a foot in both camps. I'm taking into account the spread of views, rational, non-rational and irrational, that may present at times when the community expresses views regarding trees. I am in favour of a more nuanced approach for the following reasons. This is not a case of trees or no trees, it's a much wider set of considerations. These include tree canopy, botanical species varieties in the showcase areas of our city, need for shade and the ways that this shifts over the annual sun cycle, the important role of smaller scale vegetation, which currently lies outside our vegetation replacement policies, but if well tended, think Singapore, can assist in cooling large hard surface areas and provide carbon sequestration. The risks in narrowing botanical species representation across the city, treating the Esplanade and Sir James Mitchell Park as a whole to avoid any problems being kicked sideways, seeking additional locations across our city that may offer increased tree density, e.g. perhaps the Como foreshore west of the bike path, the need to review our urban forest strategy quite regularly as we engage with the decline of vegetation on private land holdings and the removal of existing vegetation and deep soil areas that had previously been locations for healthy tree growth. Acknowledging the shortfall from city verge tree planting programs, which are unable to offset the vegetation losses incurred when with new builds in our city, offsetting the summer heat production from hard landscaping, that is footpaths, roads, and the bulk and scale of the built forms on both public and private lands. And finally, in this section, awareness that grass is a very handy crop for carbon sequestration to cool areas, particularly as it is harvested fairly regularly and regrows quite quickly. This lining up on one side or the other of a tree debate will take the city nowhere and likely miss some of the matters actually at stake. This debate could become an unhelpful distraction when we seek a community-agreed path forward. For example, there are confusions in residents' interpretation of Councillor Russell's notice of motion and what an urban forest strategy might mean, and of the role of John Oldham's suggested approach. Trees are not the only adjustments likely to be needed along the foreshore to deliver the kinds of considerations people have told us in their recent emails that they are seeking. Preserving our iconic views, safe access to and from green spaces, including for those with mobility challenges, good lighting for safe and secure community access, seating in and out of shaded areas, addressing increasing summer temperatures in the vicinity and across the city, reducing water use where possible across our city public spaces, maximising carbon sequestration across our city, protecting wildlife and water quality, concerns for property prices in areas where trees are planted by the city. So effectively, the three differing points of view appear to be rolling out as a distraction in ultimately getting any kind of agreed position from residents, and may in fact be slowing our ability to address climate change and its manifestations in our city. I believe there will need to be time taken to unpick and clarify the many issues raised by residents in their emails on this matter. To also seek a kind of adjudication to map out some potential solutions.
Sorry,
And-
Councillor Navarre, that's 5 minutes. I'm happy to move a motion for you to be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. Councillor Choi, thank you. Seconded. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Brenda Brandes, how do you wish to vote?
In the affirmative, thank you, Mr. Presiding Member.
Thank you, and that is passed unanimously. Councillor Navarre, please proceed.
And then to get back to residents with their further input or approval. So that concludes my concerns, and thank you all for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Navarre. I think just about everyone's spoken on this except me, so I'll say my piece now. Look, I'll be voting against Councillor Russell's motion. I think it's well-intentioned, but I think misguided. Trees are important. Our urban canopy is critical to the livability of our city. But when you hear the words City of South Perth, what comes to mind? For most people, it is our foreshore. It's the beautiful green open space. A big part of that are the clear views across the river to our CBD. It's what makes South Perth unique. Our competitive advantage is our foreshore. Our competitive advantage is the tourism and economic activity it generates. So the question is, why would we want to devalue this? Now, basing any decision off an antiquated 1960s document is absolutely not best practice. And I think this is the key reason I'll be voting no, because what we're doing is, during the budget, we assigned 50K for the officers to go and do a report, do a review. But Councillor Russell's motion is presupposing any findings from that report or that review. So I think from purely a governance perspective, that's not the ideal outcome. Let's wait for the report and see what the report says, because then what was the point of assigning $50,000 for this review if we're just going to sort of preempt the outcomes? Now, I'm not against trees. I think Councillor Choi and Councillor Navarre and Councillor Quidland touched on this, but I don't like how we're simplifying this debate into being pro or anti-tree. It is a lot more nuanced than that. We have to plant trees, yes, but in the right locations. And there are so many better places to plant them. I think the foreshore has been characterised through this debate as, potentially being barren. I reject that proposition, because for anyone who's been to our foreshore will agree it is such a fantastic asset. It is one of the city's key social and economic assets. The city's worked for years to help get a stagnant Main Street moving again through the Mandera Plaza project. The economic revitalisation we've seen can't and shouldn't be jeopardised. I think Councillor Choi also touched on this, but if the 1960s John Oldham concept was so great, why has it barely been adopted by other Perth councils over 60 years? Why are we only unearthing this now? I also reject the notion this is about some special interest groups. Absolutely not. To me, it's about preserving the green open space, preserving the uniqueness of our city and our foreshore for everyone, and preserving this for future generations as well. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting Councillor Russell's motion. Okay, I think that's everyone who's spoken, unless anyone has any questions. Anyone questions on this item before I invite Councillor Russell to wind up, should he wish to? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I wish to address some of the argument.
Sorry, Councillor Choi had a question. Councillor Russell. Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. I'm just a bit curious, if John Oldham is a figure of some importance in local government landscape architecture, and the city has said, I think earlier this evening, that it has many informing documents on hand, I'm just wondering why they wouldn't already have his works and plans on hand for this local government.
Ms. Amprimo, is that?
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Officer. He was actually the first state landscape architect. So he wasn't actually a local government architect, landscape architect. We haven't, at the time we did the council briefing, we hadn't completed the full literature review. We looked at our own documents, primarily that had been produced. There are a whole range of documents that may or may not be reviewed as part of the urban forest strategy review, and we will look at whatever is relevant at that point in time as we go through that work.
Thank you, Ms Primo. Any further questions on this item, given everyone has spoken? None, in which case, Councillor Russell, I invite you to wind up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. So look, I'm going to address some of the arguments that I've seen or even heard tonight. First, the sustainment, or indeed the image of trying to sustain a large turf areas is not feasible in our drying climate, period. The state government is more likely than not to mandate a reduction in our water licence consumption over the city. The entire Sir James Mitchell Reserve and the South Perth Tennis Club come under a single groundwater licence which is sourced from the Leederville aquifer. This aquifer is also a major source for water for Perth's metro scheme or drinking water. And therefore, in my opinion, this aquifer would be a priority candidate for reduced water consumption by the state government. Hence, it is vital that we future-proof this reserve by reducing its water consumption, which includes the lots which form the Esplanade foreshore. If the Esplanade foreshore is to stay as is, then other parts of James Mitchell Park will need to reduce its water consumption to compensate. This is not an equitable solution. Otherwise, how does Council explain to the community that the Esplanade foreshore turfed areas can remain turfed and green at the expense of other parts of James Mitchell Park? 2, without argument, there is a requirement for shade along the Esplanade foreshore. Now, I've heard calls for the installation of structural shade. This has merit, but not to the total exclusion of trees. The installation of structural shade as the only shade provision is just plain silly, a compromise that becomes meaningless. Imagine looking down the Esplanade and seeing a series of intermittent and isolated structural shade buildings set within a barren environment of turf. There's nothing inviting in this image. This would just add to the sterility of the area. 3, the motion calls for the objectives of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Plan to be maintained. One objective is that for Node 3 and 8, which is basically the Esplanade Foreshore, that there be an improvement in shade and shelter whilst maintaining vistas. Hence, there is an objective to maintain vistas, and therefore I cannot see how this would result in some dense bushland setting that people seem to be concerned with. I would ask Council to allow the city to come up with a solution, and this solution to go out for community consultation. As a side note, as the foreshore footpath runs close to the shoreline, that it is highly likely that trees will be behind the footpath and therefore not obstructing the panoramic view of Perth waters and the CBD skyline. This attraction would not be lost to the public. I would also like to say to Councillor Choi, trees do not prevent access to the waters. 5, the addition of trees in this area would add diversity to its look. It would bring back local fauna, go some way to bringing back the vast and Karrakatta and Basildine vegetation complexes that once populated the peninsula, go some way to meeting John Alder's vision of a diverse canopy of trees around Perth waters. That's all it is, not a bushland, and help to showcase May Gibbs' affinity for the bush. There are so many more positives than negatives with this. However, I now fear that any form of canopy on this part of the foreshore will never materialise, and that is a real shame. In summary, a vote against this motion is not giving it a chance. It would be a disservice to the South Perth community as a whole, not just for the current community, but a future community. I need to remind Council that the Act talks of intergenerational equity, and I can only therefore imagine a future community who will be left with a turfed desert in a drying climate with a reduced water allocation, only asking themselves what the hell were the council thinking of by not doing anything.
Sorry, Councillor Russell. Sorry, order, please. If we can just let Councillor Russell get to the end of his comments in silence, and then we can put this item to the vote. Councillor Russell, please continue.
So I guess I'm asking elected members to be bold, to be brave, to be rational, and just let the city do their work by voting for this motion and let it come to the community during public consultation. That's all it's asking for. It can be done within the budget. That's all it's asking for. I commend this motion to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. The item is now concluded. I will now put the item to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes on item 12.2, Councillor Russell's notice of motion. And Councillor Brenda Brandis, how do you wish to vote?
In the affirmative, thank you, Mr. Presiding Member.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. The result of the vote is the motion is defeated, 2 votes to 4. And for the benefit of the audio, those in favour are Councillor Russell and Councillor Brenda Brandis. Those opposed are myself, Councillor D'Souza, Councillors Choi, Councillor Navard and Councillor Cridland. The item is now concluded, and I would invite someone to fetch the Mayor and Councillorwoman Manolis.
Alrighty, thank you, Councillor D'Souza, for taking my place during item 12.2. We now move on to item 13, which is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. That's nil. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Are there any questions from members for the administration this evening? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 questions that I would like to be able to direct to the Director of Infrastructure, if I may, please.
Perhaps if you can start with your first question.
Okay. Could the Como foreshore beyond the bike path facing west on the Swan River be more densely vegetated than at present, given the rain, wind, weather events that occur along there?
Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Navard, for your question and for providing it in advance. The city does currently work with Main Roads WA and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions to improve the Western Foreshore. Really, the programme there is currently limited by the funding available, and we do also get grant funding from the DBCA. So, to answer your question, yes, it could be more vegetated, but we do currently have programmes that do increase the vegetation there.
Thank you. If the city were to be allocated suitable funding within the 23-24 budget review, for example, would it be possible to contract an independent specialist to review the quality and quantity of vegetation along the city foreshore at South Perth, with a view to developing a plan that would increase the quantity of vegetation, conserve the iconic views, but would also be likely to meet the approval of city residents? Is that a possibility?
Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We currently have a pretty full programme for the year in terms of the workload that we've got. So I wouldn't like to commit at this stage to be able to deliver that. However, as part of the overall urban forest strategy review, we will be looking at some recommendations that will be taken for consultation. So I think it would be preferential to focus our efforts on the urban forest strategy review and have some tangible actions out of that. Although we will be considering the areas that there are more significant opportunities, so it would be considered as part of that process.
Thank you.
And Councillor Navard, just before you continue with your third question, just a gentle reminder to all elected members that questions shouldn't relate to matters that have been decided this evening. So if you'd like to proceed, Councillor Navard.
My third question is, could the city undertake an investigation into the use of sections of reed plantings around our waterways, including the banks of the Swan and Canning rivers, with a view to improving the water quality, providing refuge for wildlife, including marine life, and for increasing the city's carbon sequestration capabilities?
Ms Ambremo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city currently works with DBCA on projects of that nature and receives some grant funding as well as co-contribution from the city. So we have existing programmes of work that do support what you're suggesting.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Councillors, any further questions for the administration this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been asked about our recycling effort through the yellow bins, and I've been asked whether or not the majority of the stuff in our yellow bin goes into landfill now like it used to a few years ago. Is there anyone who's able to answer the question about what happens with our recycled stuff in our recycle bins?
Ms Ambremo, can I send that your way?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cridland, for the question. The recycling is collected by our contractor, who is Cleanaway, and that is taken to their materials recovery facility in Guildford for processing. The only element that will go to landfill is the contamination fraction that's within that.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Councillors, any further questions this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. In that case, we're moving on to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil. And item 15 is meeting closed to the public. And there is an item on item 15. So at this stage, we're going to have to close the gallery. I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. And for those of you that have been listening via YouTube, thank you for listening this evening. if someone could please bring back the staff, including Mr. Bradford. And I suppose we can reconnect to YouTube as well. All right, so for the benefit of the tape, we just voted on item 15.1.1 and the officer recommendation was carried unanimously. So, and the officer recommendation was that Council approves the CEO's contract of employment variation request as contained within confidential attachment C. That was carried unanimously. So, that brings us to item 16, which is closure. But before I do close the meeting, I would like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at it is 8:18. Sorry, is my watch slow? 8:14, it's fast. Okay. So 8:14 p.m. Thank you all and good night.